Hi, everyone. I'm Martin Felsen, and I'm pleased to be with you. I'm an architect and urban designer. I work on projects across scales, from small buildings to large regional plans, like the one I'll show in this talk. I also regularly teach architecture and urbanism classes, and I'm really looking forward to teaching a design studio at the University of Chicago in the very near future. Before going any further, I do hope everyone is doing all right. One thing this global pandemic is showing us is that predicting even the immediate future is just no easy task. When it comes to what our world will look like in the medium term, it gets even trickier. For example, how will we reorganize our cities in the near future? How will we get around? What will it be like to get together again in public? Imagining communities of tomorrow can give us a fresh perspective on the challenges and opportunities of today. So I'm excited to talk to you about a future-oriented plan titled On to 2050. The plan is a series of medium-term predictions about the future of the Chicago metropolis. My firm, UrbanLab, which I'm in right now, we acted as urban designers for the plan. The Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, that's a mouthful, or CMAP for short, headed up the regional plan, and they're now implementing it with their many public and private partners. Before we get going, I'm going to harness some advanced digital technology and move myself here. Okay. So the broad goal of the On to 2050 plan is to make Chicagoland more competitive. So not just Chicago, but the entire metropolis, all 9 million or so people. The plan is a long-range guidebook to help all 284 communities in and around Chicago implement strategies that address the future of economic development, transportation, housing, open space, the environment, and several other quality of life issues. As urban designers of the 2050 plan, our job was to collaboratively design and visualize scenarios like this one to assess where the region currently stands and to identify catalytic solutions for creating a future-oriented, sustainable, and livable region. I'm happy to share several of these urban design scenarios with you today. The 2050 planning process identified three clear overarching principles. The first, inclusive growth, underscores the idea that we must provide economic opportunity for all residents and communities throughout Chicagoland. Resilience means preparing for future challenges and changes, both known and unknown. And prioritized investment involves carefully targeting scarce resources to maximize benefits for all. But before we jump into these three principles and how we transform them into urban design proposals, let's look at several design principles that guided our work throughout the metropolitan region. First of all, let's simply define what a metropolitan region is and what a city within a metro region is. My favorite definition of a city is by the historian Spiro Kostof, who says a city is a certain energized crowding of people. A metropolis, he goes on to say, is made up of places that tend to come clustered with other towns, places that are circumscribed in some way, and places that have a dynamic relationship to an integrated periphery. Each of Kostof's definitions includes a component of density, even aggregated density. So let's talk a bit about designing density. There are many arguments for increasing density in cities and metro areas. Perhaps most importantly, with rapid urbanization and dwindling resources, we have to use existing infrastructure more efficiently. We have to make better use of the resources we have, and we have to make what buildings we have work harder for us. But greater density alone is not going to give us better lives. No real benefit comes from being stacked on top of one another just because it's more spatially efficient. Further, I don't believe that density should be uniformly spread across the territory, especially in the United States. Governments simply can't afford to build all the critically needed infrastructures to support sprawling mega regions where everything is equally low density. Well, that's inconvenient. So instead, as you'll see in our work for the 2050 plan, including this image here, we focused on designing specific pockets of dense crowding, which we sprinkled throughout the Chicago Metroplex to stimulate collective opportunity and ideally to improve everyone's quality of urban life. We did this because we think that true urban quality comes from accommodating density and diversity in the same place. I believe that different, even conflicting uses and users can coexist and enjoy the convenience of co-location if they are accommodated in an urban framework that allows everyone to be willing neighbors. More generally speaking, at UrbanLab, we believe that planned and serendipitous urban encounters are the foundation of friendliness and even the material basis of democracy itself. We believe that the frequency, character, and purposeful design of face-to-face encounters greatly define quality of urban life. As we all know too well, the nature and availability of face-to-face run-ins is under repeated pressure, including, of course, global pandemics. We've also seen the rise of low-density suburban sprawl and the rise of virtual social networks, both of which have the potential downside of estrangement. And now we have enforced social distancing that could impact our otherwise urban lives for years to come. As we worked on the 2050 plan, we were interested to design urban spaces that have the capacity to produce happy accidents, facilitate freedom of movement, and spur unplanned, unanticipated face-to-face experiences. These are urban spaces that can lightly puncture the neuroses, or so-called bubbles, that surround each of us by nudging us to connect with our neighbors. We strive to design these sorts of places because we believe that both the social and political life of the metropolis depends on people trusting that we're better off being part of a collective community of shared spaces, shared architecture, and shared infrastructure. So let's look at several design principles underlying energized crowding in the 2050 plan. And we're going to do this from the bottom up, from the scale of the urban block, like the blocks we can see here. It might seem counterintuitive to assume that creating a regional plan would begin at the relatively small, modest scale of the city block. But as urban designers, that's exactly how we think and work, from the bottom to the top. Designing an urban block begins at the edge, or the perimeter of the block. By grouping different buildings to create perimeter enclosures, extra controllable internal spaces are created at no extra cost. Enclosures between buildings within a block provide privacy and security. As life inside buildings extend into exterior courtyards or backyards or alleys, enclosed space is protected both physically and visually. When multiplied, groups of blocks create other types of spaces, streets and other public squares that can also come at no extra cost. These spaces are defined by the edges of the blocks, allowing public access between them. Using minimal material and space to enable different activities to develop, this pattern solves the greatest challenge in urban design, which is accommodating density with a diversity of building types and uses. There are many variations on enclosed block form, ranging from internal alleyways, like this one that's been turned into a mural gallery in Melbourne, to multiple buildings surrounding one or more outside spaces. From the hutong to the patio, the hof to the cloister, there are examples of enclosed urban blocks in different climates and cultures throughout the history of urban settlement. You are, of course, are familiar with this courtyard that we designed with landscape architect Chandra Goldsmith. A key characteristic of the urban pattern of perimeter enclosure is its ability to deliver density with lower heights. A classic urban block with around 4 or 5 stories does much more than its modest appearance might suggest. Enclosed buildings can create a symbiotic urban system for many different co-located activities. The combination of density and diversity of building types and uses with a compact footprint on a human scale makes for an environment that is both efficient and multifunctional. In mixed-use blocks like this one in Malmö, Sweden, the outside edge of the enclosure is public, with the ground floor providing an ideal space for services or shops or businesses. The back, as pictured here, is private and provides a safe place for children to play and adults to chill out. The same build density can be delivered with a very different building typology and very different in-between spaces. The 4 examples of built forms shown here all have the same density. Each has a total floor area of about 241,000 square feet. Back to Malmö, the enclosed block can also make its own weather. This courtyard pattern is designed to be wind protected and become a microclimate in the winter and a shaded oasis in the summer. The taller buildings facing the sea block the cold winter winds, while they provide narrow walkways between them for pedestrian access. In this urban design proposal for the 2050 plan, we demonstrate ways of infilling partially empty blocks around suburban metro stops. Rebuilding disinvested areas adjacent to transportation hubs will be critical to long-term regional prosperity by ensuring that jobs and economic opportunities are available in communities where economically disconnected residents live. By infilling blocks and designing perimeter enclosures, we can revitalize small downtowns by creating safe spaces and places for special community events like weekend markets, as we can see in the bottom left here. The third design principle to discuss after density and perimeter enclosure is linking up. That is, linking up independent buildings on the same block. Connecting independent buildings to one another is done with firewalls, blank, windowless walls on both adjacent properties that prevent the spread of fires. This foundational, fundamental urban structure allows for the juxtaposition of buildings, and it saves a considerable amount of space that is wasted where there are gaps between buildings. The double wall created by side-to-side construction helps to insulate the buildings, reducing energy, reducing noise, reducing vibration. In Chicago, when buildings are linked up, they need to have at least 2 independent access points to the street or the public way. The system of linking up and juxtaposing can allow a great deal of diversity in each block. Linking up can be scaled up to a whole neighborhood, enabling limitless variation. Mixing old and new buildings can contribute to diversity, as described by this really nice quote by Jane Jacobs. We prize the texture of old neighborhoods not simply out of some rarefied aesthetic sense, but because they harbor a density of agreement of both those who built them and those who inherit them. The diversity of use and users can contribute to a sense of community and make walkable neighborhoods safer. A mixture of dwellings, workplaces, businesses, services ensures that people are using sidewalks throughout the day and night, which adds to the safety of the city. The inclusion of very small buildings radically changes the feel of a place, giving density a human scale and making room for varied activities that can add vitality. In this urban design proposal for the 2050 plan, we demonstrate ways of infilling blocks around schools and linking in new buildings with a new centralized public space. The new park is used by the school during weekdays and by the community in the evenings and weekends. The goal here is to demonstrate ways to rebuild communities throughout the Chicago region to create opportunities close to where people live, which also increases local revenues and enhances local government capacity to help people increase their own quality of life. As a fourth design principle, there is a vital difference between layering and conventional stacking. Unlike layering, stacking merely places the same functions on top of one another, like in this residential building. Layering places different functions and programs on top of one another and makes the most of distinctions between each space. Ideally, we believe that urban buildings should have clear horizontal layers, changing in character as they go up from the street level toward the roof, as they access light conditions that differ floor to floor. The layered building accentuates these differences. The Amaker's sandwich has 3 distinct layers with a supermarket on the ground floor, sports facilities in the middle, such as a gym, and top floor apartments connected to the roof on the top. Here, the ground floor contains a space for a cafe, studios, and an office. These uses give life to the micro-community. At the front, life spills out onto the sidewalk by replacing a couple of parking spaces on the street with planting and seating. In this urban design proposal for the 2050 plan, we demonstrate ways of infilling blocks around important commercial corridors that are linked to public transportation. We are also responding to residents across the region who increasingly seek places where a car is optional so they can walk to shopping, entertainment, and many other services. Consumer research shows that many people in the region want to live in a walkable urban place, yet only a small fraction of the housing supply is considered walkable. This image also highlights a local online shopping pickup center, which is a layered building containing several different uses and functions a little bit like a third-place community center. This particular design proposal also highlights how we can redesign urban streets to better accommodate bike lanes and small delivery vehicles that bring us all those items that we've bought online. Which brings us to the next design principle of improving our ground game. In layer buildings, the ground floor is very different in character since it connects to the public street and the public realm. The ground floor might also connect to an interior block, or in the case of Chicago, an interior alley. Ground floors, especially if they have generous ceiling heights, need to be designed more flexibly than other floors, and in this way can be more useful in accommodating programmatic density and diversity. City codes typically control ground floor commercial ceiling heights. For example, here in Chicago, the minimum floor-to-floor ceiling height is 13 feet, as we can see from this copy-paste that I took right off the web. As you know, active ground floors can help foster a sense of community and security, and ground floors support active mobility by making walking more interesting and making multitasking more possible. Designing blocks to support small, independent businesses is crucial to the fiscal health of a local community. Here, we see different scales of storefronts that support various small businesses, especially from those entrepreneurs in the local community. The most flexible space for business expansion is, of course, the sidewalk. The sidewalk can be used for just about anything. Perhaps more than any other ground floor program, tables and chairs on the sidewalk generate dynamic street life and contribute to a more diverse and high-density use of urban space. In the same way that the enclosed block delivers proportionally more ground floor, it can also deliver proportionally more top floor, especially compared to a high-rise building. The top floor has the potential to have many of the same qualities of a suburban house, such as privacy, light, private outdoor space. The top floor in this sense can be leveraged to attract all sorts of people to invest in urban living. In this design proposal for the 2050 plan, we demonstrate how roofs can also benefit the local ecosystem of a place. Green roofs and solar panels can be part of a redevelopment process that helps create unique opportunities to conserve, restore, and enhance natural resources, especially at infill locations, and to increase climate resilience. Here we're also highlighting the value of green infrastructure along the streetscape to cool down commercial corridors, increase property value, and mitigate flooding during heavy rainstorms. The final principle for today is spatial diversity. If we make a simple comparison between a linked up and layered building in an enclosed block and a standalone stacked building in an open landscape or parking lot, the freestanding building generates fewer kinds of space than the one that is part of a dense, dynamic urban block. In this design proposal for the 2050 plan, we explore how the enclosed block with layered buildings offers considerable spatial diversity. This image shows a typical metro stop in a suburban downtown township throughout the region. Reinvesting in areas like this one with existing services and infrastructure has broad regional benefit. By reinvesting, local governments and transportation providers like Metro can reduce the cost of infrastructure and services for everybody. Businesses, I should say, can access a larger pool of potential customers and workers, and residents can reach a broader set of options for work, recreation, and services via public transit, car, or even bike. Here, we speculate on how the town might evolve as it reinvests in upgraded streets and sidewalks to make walkability safer and more convenient. And we predict how these public investments will spur private investments by building developers or businesses who see value in an upgraded transit-oriented community. After all, if someone who works in the Loop can walk to this suburban metro station, they're effectively walking to work. This third iteration shows how the public space of the street connects to multiple modes of transportation and a walkable small-town Main Street neighborhood. Importantly, what's the best design approach for accommodating large buildings in a neighborhood such as a school, a library, an IKEA, as we can see here, a hospital, a hotel, a supermarket, these kind of big box stores? How do we accommodate larger uses in a neighborhood environment without losing the walkable human scale? Clearly, some larger activities can fill an entire block. So from a design perspective, larger buildings need to be integrated into the local streetscape without breaking up the smaller scale rhythm and life of the local streets. And in many cases across the region, pedestrian-centered streetscapes need to be designed to connect to unlinked larger buildings. In this design proposal for the 2050 plan, we looked at this existing condition of a commercial corridor of a collection of former warehouse buildings surrounded by parking lots. It's the robustness of a fine-grained urban grid that make for resilience, simultaneously accommodating larger components of the city with public life. Together, we get a system of independent yet linked up fractals with limitless permutations. The totality can make a resilient system, accommodating difference and tolerance to change over time. Here we also see hints of a new future-oriented transportation system, which will be the focus of the next talk. In the meantime, I look forward to our question and answer session where we'll discuss how the Chicago region can seize its destiny rather than leaving the future to chance. To thrive, we must address our challenges collaboratively and ensure Chicago's global status as a center of commerce and a place where opportunity is open to everybody. So I look forward to thinking, or I should say real-time zooming, about Chicago's challenges and opportunities together. Until then, ciao everyone.